biennials. And overall, can you see this? It's much more centered on the Northwest. So there's not such diversity as biennials, which has multiple reasons. They are much more tied to the distribution of global wealth than art biennials. Anyway, but we have these global infrastructures where artworks circulate, on the symbolic side, on the market side. We also have looser infrastructures, which I call the global exhibition space and global auction market. Lots of data in the book. I'm not going into detail here because we want to move through. Next one, field-specific global discourses. What do I mean by that? First of all, the rise of critical discourses among art critics, art historians, art theorists, that really, it's really fascinating to see from the 1990s how we see the rise of global discourses about contemporary art, but also how they shift in their meaning. They start out with multicultural and post-colonial critiques, and by the 2000s, it becomes more normal to speak about global art world, global art, terms that weren't even imaginable in the 1980s. So we see a shift in the discourses, and in the market side, the discourse is very different, but we see the rise of new global art market reports and investment reports, global auction news, and nowadays, people very normally talk about, have you read the latest global art market report? This is almost taken for granted, that we take the global as a frame for reference, for the way we report about the global art world, the art world, and that was like in the 1980s, you would think China, it wasn't even on the map, So that's what I mean with why these global discourses are so important, because their proliferation and normalization led to the fact that the global has become a more normal, almost a taken for granted frame of reference. We think there is a global market now. But the meanings, what global art means, or et cetera, remains up to debate. This is not a new master narrative, it's more a frame of reference that creates a new foundation for new kinds of debates that are still unfolding, and they need to unfold. We are not global truly, or not truly inclusive yet in this global art field. The last part is the Global Institution for Conservation and Evaluation, global art prices. Venice had always art prices, but when you examine how they distributed, you see that they really started only to get more global in who gets these art prizes since the 1990s. And we see also the rise of a new art prize like Premium Imperiale in Japan, So that's what I mean, that becomes a little bit more global. But we also see the rise of global artist rankings, both about global exhibitions and the global market side. And let me be honest, these rankings are highly contested in the art field. People say, oh my God, this is too crude, and how can you even rank artists? But when you talk with these people, they have subscribers from all over the world, including artists. Artists submit their exhibitions there. And what I argue is they've also contributed to normalize the very terms by which we talk about artistic value at its highest level. The most successful artists are now globally successful artists. So that's why I include them in the debate. If you put this all together, we have a kind of global institutional discursive infrastructure, for the mediation and circulation of contemporary art. But it's very important to think about it as just one layer. It's not everything what the art world is about. So that's very important, that it doesn't diminish what's going on in lower level fields. And if you look closely, and you might have noticed it the way I structured the talk, we can divide these global infrastructures in a subfield that is more dedicated to building up critical symbolic value, the biennials, the art critical discourses, the prices, and a subfield that's more dedicated to building up market value. It's very obvious, art fairs and auction houses are a different game. Now the question, of course, is how do they relate? And I argue that these subfields follow, and I'm speaking here of dominant logics, follow very different logics and have actually become more polarized. Why? The main reason is, so first, critical discourse and cosmopolitan logic is more here on the symbolic side. It's one of the dominant logics here. And on the right side, it's art as an asset. And what we see with globalization is a normalization and global diffusion of the very idea that art could function as an investment, yeah, as an asset. It wasn't the same in the 80s or 90s. We had some first seeds for that, but that is really part, and I describe in a chapter in the book how this could even happen, yeah? And so this polarization is mainly, according to my argumentation, because the art market became more radically commercialized and financialized. So the art market no longer relies on its experts only to build its value, but creates its own machineries of valuation. Yeah, and I show you this in data also with artistic careers in a minute. And this process happened because the art market, in the course of globalization, became more connected to financial markets, so various mechanisms I discussed, and also to new global wealth that came from financial market, that came from rising economies, and that brought in new criteria of how they judge good artists, yeah, and how important the market valuation for them is. And in the symbolic subfield, the external factors that influenced how the field opened up were very different ones. Look at this: post-colonial independence movement, multicultural politics, critical post-colonial and globalization discourses. So it's kind of like, it's also you remember, relative autonomy refracted through the field. The external forces also tear it more apart. Yeah? So that's basically a big picture summary of the first part of the book. You can imagine how much you have to read, yeah? To get all the details. Okay, let's go to the second part a little bit more quickly, but this is very important background for you. So how did this influence the global careers and diversity of contemporary artists from around the world? Let's look at this scheme. Let's first look at how artists typically traverse these two subfields in their careers. Yeah? So this is a scheme. It's based, let me say a few words. It's based on the top 100 artists in the global exhibition space and global auction market. So it's around 200 top artists. And for each artist, we traced where do they stand in terms of their relative exhibition success and their relative sales, but in the most commercial sector of the market, which is the auction market, yeah? And so you get a scheme where the relative rank, this is symbolic, this is market, how they relate to each other, and then we clustered them and we found four main groups, yeah? It's complex methodological procedure, heavy to explain that. Data, you know, it's always like so crude and so, but you have to be super careful with how you measure things, so there's a long appendix. In any case, when you look at these lines, yeah, and then you look at these numbers, I gave them names, semi-autonomous, whatever. The first thing that's really important to take away here is we have two larger groups. 61 artists that are relatively high in critical recognition, curatorial success, rather low in commercial sales, yeah? And that's actually the largest groups of commercial artists, 82 artists, relatively low, and it's never going really up, and then they spike in commercial success. That's basically a sign of high, yeah? Which I also add. And then you have one group, the semi-autonomous concentrated 33, they have higher symbolic recognition than these commercial stores, but their relative market sales are lower than the commercial stores. That tells us that in order to raise up in the commercial market, you might have a museum exhibition here or there, but it's not that necessary to raise to the top. There are other mechanisms at play, yeah? And I say a little bit more about that, but we have only 3 artists, and remember, this is the convergence model we talked about, yeah? They say, oh, it's all one art industry. 3 artists who can combine these two ways of success to relatively similar degrees. Can you imagine who that is? Any ideas? Now I'm testing you, not just me talking here. Any ideas? You can't get wrong.
Like Andy Warhol, you said before?
You're on hot.
Living or dead?
Living.
Living, okay.
It's a hot trail that she's saying out here. Orozco is there, the Chinese guy there, they need to be here. Orozco is actually here,
Okay.
and the Chinese guy is here. But I mean, I noticed you listen to
Maybe
it.
like David Cockney or something like that.
Jeff Koons.
Yes! Jeff Koons! Super! And how do we bring together Andy Warhol and Jeff Koons? Well, these three artists, Jeff Koons, Damien Hirst, and Richard Prince,
Okay.
they are all three artists that, in their artistic strategies, followed the footsteps of Andy Warhol and the model of a business artist. And by doing that, they became kind of an avant-garde as those who transgress the norms of what commercial can mean. So they became commercial as an avant-garde strategy, quote unquote. Yeah? And that's how they got critical recognition, by being hyper-commercial. But to play this game, you have to be very clever, so that critics don't dismiss you as it's total sellout. And they struggle with these kind of debates, you know? So it's really, it's a spot that's reserved for a few, yeah? That few can master, so to speak. But what we ultimately see is a very polarized distribution. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah? Now, I have to say, it's important to say that these artists here, we are measuring only auction success, yeah? And auctions is a very particular, it's the most commercial game you can enter in the art world. They do have gallery sales, they do have galleries. This is really the global elite. It doesn't mean they have no sales, yeah? But they are in the galleries, and typically they are lower than auction sales, typically, yeah? All over. And the second thing is, these are born 1970, but as of 2017, so they were like, you know, they still have a chance to go to this quarter here, yeah? So there could still be a conversion happening, because these guys are typically around 1950s, yeah? So we shouldn't think that they don't have any money, yeah? But it's just like, they're not playing the same game in the market like the others, yeah? And these really outcompete them in terms of commercial sales, just to make that clear. Now, importantly, these different careers are also associated with different types of art that the artist engaged with, as you might have imagined. And when you look into the typical artistic media, what was really striking for me, but maybe for you not, when I discovered, oh my God, it's so clear, you know, is commercially, you have almost 90% paid, okay? And then the second biggest is sculpture. That might be okay, if you work in the market, you know, painting sells, well, okay. But that the other more autonomous artists, 80% in painting, almost 80%, 78, and only 78% in installation, and only 18% in painting. That is the striking fact, yeah? That they engage in a medium, and also other mediums like video art, photography, film. These are all media that are really hard, or at least harder to commercialize, and where you don't get as much commercial sales out of it, yeah? What does it tell us? If you think about it, it tells us those artists that succeed in the global exhibition space are chosen by curators for engaging in artistic media that are less commercial and more discursive and more experimental. So the two subfields are really governed by different logics of selection. And if you want to succeed in one subfield, unless you're also doing everything, you know, it almost excludes your succeeding in the other. Do you see that? It's really striking to see that. For me, it was a revelation. Very much against the conversion model, yeah? Maybe Jeff Koons play in between or so, but many don't, yeah? Anyway, the chapter further discusses other career characteristics, how they differ in other aspects. I'm not going into the details. I just want to go into what did it do to the diversity, yeah? I have lots of data, but I don't want to bore you with numbers, yeah? Let's just summarize, and then we look a little bit into the artists. artist, okay? What happened in the global auction market, I examined it until 2017, so from 1997 to 2017, 20 years. What we see is rapid but volatile changes, but they are mostly for artists from countries with rising wealth, particularly China, Asia, and we see relatively limited diversity, and the book has a chapter dedicated to the rise of a contemporary artist from China, and we use them as a lens to understand one of the biggest hypes was in 2000, where the rise of Chinese contemporary art. They became so successful, they were even more selling better than US contemporary artists. Can you believe that? So, and I trace that it's really a speculation hype. It was really a speculation game. I'm not saying everyone is speculative among these artists, I'm just saying that those who run to the top are really like hyped. It was really, and here's the artist. These games can be very volatile, and here you see a graph that maps the sales of Jun. Yeah, here he rises. He's part of this rise. Yeah, and then it drops with the financial crisis. So it's a really volatile game, and you go into these speculation hypes. So overall, but there wasn't much change in overall diversity or something like this. It's more limited. I call it limited diversity. It's no longer as West-centric, but it's not really diverse. What happened in the global symbolic subfield, when we trace changes among the top 100 artists in the global exhibition space, what we see when you look at the data I present in the book is we see gradual changes, very slow, yeah? And it's very much based on different generations. But overall, there's much more diversity. It's almost doubled, yeah, from 20-something countries to 40 countries that are now represented in the top. And what's remarkable in comparison to the market is that more artists from poorer world regions, yeah, African artists even had a little advantage, so artists with African backgrounds. So you see again different patterns. Yeah? You can look up the precise data as well, but you see they follow very different patterns of globalization in terms of diversity. Now, at the end, I want to say a few words, maybe 5 more minutes or so, about the artist case studies. Yeah, I have to emphasize the artists are chosen on really careful criteria, and they don't represent their countries. So Gabriel Orozco is not a representative of Mexican contemporary art. Yeah? Don't get me wrong. I know, complex case. Yeah? Same for the Chinese artist. They just represent different types of success in the period of the globalizing field. Yeah? And what the case studies do, they look at different factors that must come together for the building of a global artistic career. Yeah? The art itself, the artist, the personality of the artist, the networks the artist builds, yeah? But also how the field itself is changing and how the field in turn is embedded in broader macro-historical changes. So an artistic career is really a complex interplay of different factors. Yeah? There's no cookie-cutter recipe, but the book can give you some categories to think with. What do we have to look out in a particular historical moment to understand what's going on? So it's not like that you do the same as Orozco if you want to be globally successful. Yeah? And when you look at the meso level, we see very different patterns at the field level, and very different patterns about how these artistic careers unfolded in terms of what types of artistic strategies are successful in these two fields. Then what types of transnational social networks did they build? Yeah, strong ties versus weak ties, more globally distributed versus very central in the centers. And then also they had very different relations to the global centers. Yeah? What I think could interest us the most, what's going on here? What's going on? Okay. But
maybe you can press volver a cargar.
I want to say 3 more points about the artistic strategy so that you can charge me and say, she talks the whole time about global contemporary art and never discusses a single one. Yeah? So I want to say, so is this not going? No?
Mostrar de todos modos, ¿no? Ya, sí, voy a hacer un refresh. Ya.
Yeah, or we can do it this way. Yeah. So the way a sociologist looks at artistic strategies is to look at why were these artistic strategies valued in the particular context in which they circulate. Yeah. And what does it tell us about the different ways of evaluation, appreciation about contemporary art in these different global circuits? Yeah, that's a different logic than an art historian would like, oh, what are the formal features and so on. And the first one that you already see on the slide, I'm just moving forward as Kirsten tries to help us. The first thing that we can think about is how did these artists relate to transnational artistic tendencies in their art? So in order for an artist to reach beyond their national domestic field, they need to engage in one way or another in languages that are not just limited to their own national field. Yeah, you have to find a kind of artistic or aesthetic bridge to be in dialogue with what goes beyond. Yeah, but the way you find this entry point or this dialogue was very different in the market than it was like in the more institutional centers. The way they did this dialogue and that reveals. Oops. Okay. Yeah. So for Jumin Jun, it was very important for his success that his art resembled Western pop art. That critics and mediators could say, wow, this is the Chinese take on Western contemporary art. Yeah? The artist himself, he never thought about doing something like similar to Andy Warhol, but they integrated it into it, and so they could create a bridge, yeah? A meaningful bridge to international tendencies. And surprise, surprise, Western pop art was already a dominant market style in the global market. So they created a bridge to an art that was already quite popular, and so they could heighten his own popularity, which contributed to marketability. So you can see how criteria of marketability make certain framings possible. And he was one of the most successful in the market ahead of his peers because this bridge was created, yeah, others wasn't. Again, he's not representative of contemporary Chinese art. There is an Ai Weiwei, for example, yeah, and things like that. So, but he was outstanding in his commercial success, and that's what I argue made it possible. This particular type of bridging is an already quite lucrative Western pop star. Yeah, that's one of the things. Oh, thank you so much. You rescued the. No, I think we just go with this. Yeah. Okay, then we do, okay. So, and for Orozco, the game was a little bit more complex than that, yeah? What accounted for his bridging, how he found an entry is, he aligned his work, more or less consciously, intentionally, with a rising avant-garde tendencies in the 90s. That already started in Mexico, post-conceptual artistic strategies, yeah? So it was just about on the rise, so he aligned himself with an innovative artistic tendency in the international centers at that time, but he did that in very clever ways that critics could ascribe him originality, yeah? So he was very original in his take on conceptual art in various dimensions I discuss in the book. But you see that you can't just mimic or resemble a dominant style, you have to do something new. And if you can align it with a general tendency that's just coming up, all the better, yeah? It will carry you. Yeah, does it make sense, the difference? Okay, next, two more. A second aspect, and you cannot underemphasize, overemphasize how important it is for artists from so-called non-Western countries, especially in this historical period, were geocultural markets. When the art field started to open up, yeah, it suddenly became very important that you're a Mexican artist, that you're a Chinese artist, yeah? Because for curators, it was very interesting now, oh, we are no longer Eurocentric, we are showing someone from Mexico, we are showing someone from Africa, and so it just became you even look at the latest biennial brochure of the Venice Biennial, oh, we have artists from all these countries, etc., etc. Yeah. Now, the thing is, you can just leave it like this. It's okay. It's yeah. Now, but Gabriel Orozco really understood if he would play the Mexican card in that context where everyone wanted a Mexican, he would not stay in the game for long. Because the danger of this is you become kind of othered, you become exoticized. This is our representative of Mexico, but you're not taken seriously as an individual artist who's on par with the rest unmarked Western artists. Yeah? You become kind of a representative of an ethnic or geocultural background. So he was in a kind of dilemma. How do I deal with that? You know, they want a Mexican, but I can't be too Mexican. So he played a very complex game, but he was simultaneously Mexican and simultaneously global. And so it was really a dance around this dialectic. And in the course of it, he cosmopolitanized his body of work in a kind of, I'm a Mexican global artist. Yeah? Very clever. I traced this in the book. It's really fascinating. Yeah? So, and nowadays, what you can say nowadays is Mexican contemporary art has gotten such a good reputation in the art field that the label Mexican can actually be an advantage nowadays. Yeah? So he actually was at the forefront of laying a trail in changing the reputation. But when he entered it, he was kind of from the periphery, and if you are Mexican from the periphery, you run the danger of being othered. Things have changed. The artistic prestige of Mexico has changed, but it's still a very delicate game you have to play in not being too boxed into one geocultural identity. Now in the market, it was very, very different, as you can imagine by now, yeah? You see these pictures, yeah? Very Chinese, Great Wall, etc., etc., yeah? What helped Zhu Minjun to succeed was an overt allusion to his Chineseness, yeah? But it was a very particular kind of Chineseness. Now, at the time, China, remember, this was like the Olympics. They entered the WTO. China was all over in the business news, yeah, as this rising superpower. And collectors and market people were very fascinated about this rising country, and they saw Chinese contemporary art as a kind of cultural mirror into them. So when you as an artist alluded to China in one way or another, you were part of this broader cultural trend that was not created by cultural critics or curators, but by the broader media. This is how you can see this field is much less autonomous. It's more influenced by broader media discourses and so on. Yeah? So he was rising by his over-Chineseness because there was a trend for China in this period. Now I just came back from China, yeah, and the artists are trapped in that because the reputation of China has changed. Yeah, they say no curator is looking in our direction. We have such a hard time because they didn't build up necessarily artistic prestige as a country, but they built up broader reputation. Yeah, it's part of these broader geopolitical discourses. Does it make sense to you guys? Yeah. Okay. So that is different. So in the market, broader reputations are relevant. Yeah. How will you relate to them? And in the art field, it's more like the artistic prestige of the country. And when it's low, you better be careful not to box too much into your own national country. I love it. I love it. I cannot even move this further. Okay, now, yeah. Okay, no gracias. I want to say a last thing that I find very, very interesting. When you think about the last element, and then we're close. I could talk forever, but I know. So anyway, the last thing is we can think what are the artistic features of the artist's work that make it travel more easily across different countries, yeah, which I call artistic features for diffusibility. And in the market, what helped Zhu Minjun very much is that through a very repetitive style and an iconic motive, the laughing face, he created an artistic brand, more or less consciously, yeah? But he people in the market at that time sometimes couldn't remember what's the name of the artist, Chinese names or whatever. But they always said, this is the artist with the laughing faces. They could relate to it. Yeah? Very recognizable motive, stands for China. We need to have a piece of that. Yeah? It's kind of this logic of a brand which travels more easily across different cultural contexts because it's easily recognizable. In Roscoe's case, it's exactly the opposite. That's why I find this comparison so interesting. He was very ambiguous where to put it in which box. Yeah? He didn't create a recognizable style. He said he does sculpture, he does drawings, he does installations, he did polysemic works, he did site-specific works. It shifted a lot over time. And that was a successful strategy. I'm not saying he did that in order to be diffusible. Artists didn't think in that term, that's my categories, yeah? But that helped him to travel also more easily on other criteria, of course, because curators like to create interpretations around works. They like complexity, yeah? They like to follow their own discursive strategies, and these vary in different national fields. Still, I've said, remember I talk about these layers, yeah? So if you create a body of work that is open enough to be adapted to different agendas and contexts, yeah, but still within a broader rising frame, then you facilitate the artwork's travel, yeah, in this more symbolic subfield of critics and experts. Does it make sense to you? Yeah? Okay, so these are extreme cases, so there are variations in between, and as I said, if you want to understand the full careers, you have to look more closely into the chapters. So this is really just a snapshot of what was going on. So this was a run-through the book, some of the basic points. Globalization in contemporary art beyond the West-centric past. I say neither reproduction nor radical change. We have multiple kinds of transformations. Beyond unitary models of the globalization of contemporary art, we should look at different subfields. And I say this book is only the beginning. It's not meant to be binary. Yeah? There are variations in between, and we might find different subfields. We need to find a subfield for political activism, for example, things like that. Yeah? Or NFTs is maybe a totally different game. Yeah? So it's just a beginning. There could be more research to refine the picture. And one of the things that I really want to bring across, don't take the global auction market for a parameter of artistic value. What's going on there, and I discuss this in the book, it's a game in itself. Yeah? So it's not necessarily what you would think. And maybe another point to bring across, non-commercial circuits are really important for facilitating more cosmopolitan exchange in the arts, and also as a foundation for more long-term careers. Yeah? It has to be translated in the market. And galleries doing aligned, really hard work to do that. We need to honor them for that. And but this is different from the auction market. Okay, what's at stake? Multiple global transformations, a framework to understand different players and how they interplay, different factors of global artistic careers, and we need to support non-commercial approaches in the global art field. That's it. Great, thanks for bearing with me. Yes, we have some time for questions, 20 minutes, and I'm very curious to hear what you say from your own, this is kind of like the global view, but maybe you have different experiences or have some challenges to me, which I would embrace, so curious. Any questions? Yes?
You mentioned that Orozco and the Chinese artists, there was this tendency for curators and critics to embrace artists from the periphery or from the other countries.
They would not say it this way, but that was basically going on.
And this was back in the 90s. No?
Exactly, end of 80s, 90s, it started. Mm-hmm.
And do you think that something like this is happening today in other groups, or referencing other groups? And if so, what groups do you think they're targeting? And maybe that targeting is not the proper word, but is this a phenomenon that is happening today in, with other groups?
It's a very good question. First of all, I have to say that this happened in the 1980s and 1990s, and people started to say we can no longer be Eurocentric, we have to become more diverse. But there were contentions in the field, what does it mean to become more open? And they're still going on, these contentions. Every big biennial, there's a new debate, oh, this is still colonial and this is not global enough, or we need to go to the global south. So this is really still going on, these debates, and they need to be going on. What I'm just saying is, nowadays, the big shift is nowadays, if you're a curator for a large-scale group show, you cannot afford to just show artists from Western Europe and the US. It's a big shift. In the 80s, it was taken for granted, yeah? So that's a big shift, and I think the debates are still going on. And in some ways, I feel some of the debates, I mean, at least in the US, in some ways what's going on in Europe is not US, but more like global or cosmopolitan. Some of these debates are even less sophisticated now than they were in the 80s. So, because there was the rise of multiculturalism, and they said we can't be identity essentialism and so on. So what I see is a little bit of return, but in less sophisticated theoretical terms. But overall, I think it needs to be going on. It needs to be going on. In addition, now we find more sub-differentiations and other groups come in. Now it's a big trend in indigenous artists, native artists in the US, Black African American artists gain more visibility, and they need to gain more visibility. So there's also things going on within the country. But what goes on in the global circuits, I will need to have more research. Great question.
Well, I would like to ask you a question related to an experience that is happening in Mexico. One of my friends is developing an exhibition that is called Arte Capital, and it happens 2 weeks ago. And this was a collaboration of 106 artists that was involved in that exhibition, and I believe that this is a unique experience because they also create art in the place, and they put music and
Site specific, yeah.
Some kind of like a mix of feeling like environmental creativity, and this is this kind of like activities is this happening all over the world? Is this an issue that is taking place, or is it possible that it can be exported, these kind of things, to other cities, and it is something that do you know that is happening around
Very
the world?
interesting question. So basically, if I understand your question is, what about art projects and art exhibitions that engage with environmental topics, environment, sustainability? Is that what you asked?
Yes, they are some of them.
Yeah. So first of all, let's say art is such a pluriverse. There's so many ways of making art and so many ways of debating art, and there are so many art groups and collectives and even political activist groups. So it's hard for me to say what's going on all over the world, and remember we have these different layers. So I want to answer your question in 2 ways. The first way is, if you wanted to think how an artwork or style or discourse travels, it would probably have to move through one of the centers. So if it starts to be more prevalent in New York or Paris or London, then we probably see it more diffusing outwards, yeah? I would say this, based on my data, how artistic careers develop, once it's in one of these bigger cosmopolitan hubs, then it's likely to spread more further. That's the first answer. The second answer is, in the course of the pandemic, what was really interesting is that we see a rise of a greater reflexivity among these top layers, global institutions, towards sustainability and environmental. So the art world started the first time to question on a broader level, what do we do actually here with all these art biennials and art fairs once it was halted? And we see the rise of more environmental discourses, definitely also in large-scale exhibitions, for sure, yeah. But as a researcher, I'm always careful, you know, I said for sure, but actually I need data to show. So let's not say for sure. I see this as a tendency as an art world participant rather than as a researcher. I would need more data. Okay.
I got curious on, do you have any insight from the graphs we saw? What would be the sociological reason for artists to be like, if they had like this critical value, to be opposed to the commercial value? Because at the end of the day, people who present the art are the people who are buying, right? So what would be the spectator's reason to like, for these two types of value to be opposed most of the time?
Great question. You think from the artists, yeah? But what these data actually show us, these are artists that made it to the top of their fields, yeah? So these are the artists, so I took the 100 top artists in the global exhibition space and the 100 top artists in the global auction market, and then I looked how do they actually relate in there. And if it would be the conversions thesis, they would be just the same, yeah? So, and what you see is when artists do what they do. They don't necessarily always say, oh, I want to be at the top in the market or not or whatever. So I don't have a super hyper strategic model that they do this in order to be successful with the curator as well as the market. But what you see is a filter of the mediators. The mediators choose and love artists. The curators choose and love artists that engage in installation, that engage in video, that engage in performance. Yeah? They don't like painters so much. Maybe it's different now, post-pandemic, rise of painting in Mexico art world, maybe it's global too, we don't know. But this reflects 2017, the top artists, and we see a very clear divide. The curators don't like artists that appear too commercial, and so they hype artists that are more engaging and non-commercial. Whereas the auction experts, oh my God, I don't want to work in the auction market, I have to tell you. They are under so much pressure. Every sale needs to be successful because it's public, yeah? You can't fail. So they're not taking any risks. They want things that are a sure bet in selling, so they go mostly with, unless they have someone where they say, oh, this museum is likely to buy, so we'll take an installation, so we're a little bit more edgy, yeah? But they are risk averse. So what you see here is a filtering of the mediators. You know, there are many artists that engage with Bose or something like this, but to reach to the top, there's a divide. Does it make sense?
Yes.
But again, I say these artists doesn't mean they have no sales. They're selling through galleries, yeah? And in the galleries also tend to cater in certain segments of the market. I distinguish different galleries, but they engage with collectors that are not just looking for artist investment. So they engage with collectors that might be open to installation, that might be open to video, and that might sustain them as a gallery. Yeah? So they also have a market, it's just not the same market. That's why we can't speak of like this one market. We need to speak of a market subfield where there are more commercial and less commercial galleries and mediators. Great question.
Hello. I would like to ask you, what do you think about the race of investment coming to another market from crypto world? Like token recent Catalan sale, which is kind of disruptive, I believe. And how do you think it's going to affect the global dynamic on a long term, or maybe not so long term?
I think that this whole game of cryptocurrency industry and this whole new techno elite, I wonder if this is even creating its own subfield, you know, also around NFTs and so on. The auction market likes to integrate them and say, oh, we are becoming more democratic, yeah? We are shown NFTs, I mean, this is kind of landward, it's not, I mean, this is already avant-garde, so to speak. It's not NFT, but it's definitely a new class that bring different criteria, different playfulness. They use it also to self-advertise. Remember the Beeble work by Christie's in 2020 for 65 million, I think it was, yeah. And NFT, huh?
69.
69, yes. Thank you for. So I think this. I wonder if this is even a separate game. Yeah. We'll see. But the auction market is probably happy to have them.
Okay, thank you.
Are you working in the auction market? I mean, it's probably the most stressful job in the entire ecology. I mean, this is like a race for money.
Like
money.
Wall Street.
Huh?
Like Wall Street.
Yeah, I mean, when you sell, it's not like Wall Street. You're dealing with a lot of very high-profile people, but you're also under this pressure. You have to constantly top what was before. Yeah, it's like, and when you ask them for, so what was last year? What was 5 years ago? They don't even remember because it's such a fast-paced world. You know, they don't have the archives, and so it's really there's a lot of pressure. So it's really not. Maybe someone wants to work in the auction. Anyway. Okay,
Maybe
great.
before we finish, you can maybe talk a little bit about your next book, because we started talking about it at the very beginning, and just to give like a little bit of an insight what you are doing next.
Yeah, super. So I've come back to, I was in Mexico before for the Orozco study, and I come back to Mexico because I think it's a really fascinating and a very promising market. Yeah, it has undergone tremendous growth, and it's probably the leading market in Latin America. And my new book is, you know, the first book is about this rise of this global framework, and the second book is about more like how do different national fields articulate with this global framework, yeah? And to bring out more the diversity on the ground and the different ways these fields internationalize. But I shift from the perspective of artists and mediators to the perspective of consumers, collectors. Nobody takes them seriously in our research yet, so all the studies that are out there in social science about the globalization of markets and so on, they look at the mediators. But the mediators would be nothing without their audiences, without people that support them, yeah? And a common problem or a common challenge in emerging markets, I mean, Mexico is no longer an emerging market, was to cultivate their own collector base for contemporary art. And I traveled to the different countries in the world. I was in China 2 months now, in Beijing and Shanghai, and now I'm coming to Mexico to understand how did contemporary art collectors emerge, and how did mediators achieve to cultivate a growing local collector base, yeah, not just an international collector base. And I think this could be really helpful also to understand how markets can go further, so that the local ecology is supported by their own buyers and collectors. So that's basically it. I just had a fascinating interview this afternoon with one major collector. I'm not telling you the name, but it's really fascinating and really inspiring to see how some of them are really engaged with the community, and it's not just about buying or collecting, it's actually become something much bigger. And why do they do this? How did they get to that point? Yeah? That's what I try to understand.
We have one last question here, and then.
Hi, I'm not sure if you mentioned this before, I can barely see the screen, but I wrote it down. I have a question considering the different types of careers for the artists. How do the context of being in a private collection versus museum presentation shape an artist's engagement with art history?
So first of all, I would distinguish here different questions, yeah? So first one is, how an artist engages with art history is not necessarily determined in which collections they are, yeah? But you raise a very important point. How does being in certain collections affect an artist's value, maybe, or reputation? Yeah.
Versus museum representation in the long term,
Yeah. In the long
to
term.
be written down in art history.
Yeah. I would say we are now in an era. So public collections is always great in this kind of consecrated elite circle, which is more the traditional model of transferring, and in the gallery market, yeah, where collectors are more oriented at such criteria of what do experts say, what do museums say. But it can vary. In China it's different than in the US, and in Mexico it's different too, how much value they place on public collection. Private collections, it very depends. So there are some major private collections when people know, I mean, I'm not sure how it's in Mexico, but when people know, this artist is in the Jumex collection, does it make a difference? It probably does, yeah? It's almost similar to a museum collection because there are not as many public collections for contemporary art in the first place, yeah? And in this vacuum, some of the bigger private collections can jump in and fill that through their own reputation. It depends on their reputation as private collections. So, I mean, Eugenio did a lot for the scene and he really promotes art. In China, some of these private collections are more investment vehicles than the private museums, and that also affects how valuable it is to know that they're in this collection, and people in China know, this is just an investor, you know, and then they don't take it seriously. So it really depends on the reputation of the collector and the private, you know, setup. So it can make a difference. That's how sociologists think. They always think in reputations and status and whatever, so it's context. Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah?